I found out my HOA treasurer had been embezzling thousands of dollars over 10 years when I volunteered to help with a basic budget review, and what started as a simple spreadsheet audit turned into the most dramatic neighborhood scandal Phoenix, Arizona had ever seen. My name is Gregory Garrison, and I moved into the Sunnyside Heights subdivision back in 2016 with my wife and 2 kids. The development was one of those classic Arizona communities, built in the early 2000s with stucco homes in varying shades of beige and tan, red-tiled roofs that baked under the relentless sun, and desert landscaping that required minimal water. The HOA dues were reasonable at $200 per quarter, and for the most part, the neighborhood looked decent. The common areas were maintained, the community pool stayed clean, and the playground equipment seemed safe enough for the kids. I never paid much attention to HOA politics. I paid my dues on time, kept my front yard presentable, and avoided painting my house any unapproved colors. That was the extent of my involvement until March 2025, when everything changed. The HOA board consisted of 5 members: President Linda Martinez, Vice President Tom Hendricks, Treasurer Karen Gallagher, Secretary Beth Morrison, and Member-at-Large Frank Chen. Karen had been the treasurer for as long as anyone could remember. She was 53 years old, with short blonde hair that was always perfectly styled, and she wore expensive jewelry that seemed a bit flashy for neighborhood board meetings. She drove a new BMW X5 that she replaced every 3 years like clockwork. The trouble started at the March quarterly meeting. I attended because there was a proposal to increase the HOA dues by 15%, and I wanted to understand where our money was going. The meeting was held in the community center, a small building near the pool with beige walls and uncomfortable folding chairs. About 40 homeowners showed up, which was a decent turnout for our neighborhood of 280 homes. Linda Martinez called the meeting to order at 7 in the evening. She was a retired schoolteacher in her 60s, organized and fair-minded, the kind of person who actually read the bylaws and followed proper parliamentary procedure. She walked through the agenda items efficiently, and then we got to the budget discussion. As you can see from the handout, our reserves are lower than we would like, Linda explained, gesturing to the photocopied budget sheet that had been distributed. We have had some unexpected expenses over the past few years, including the pool resurfacing in 2023 and the main entrance landscaping renovation last year. We are proposing a 15% increase to rebuild our reserves and handle upcoming maintenance needs. I looked at the numbers on the sheet. Something felt off, but I could not put my finger on it. The listed expenses seemed reasonable enough, but the reserve balance was surprisingly low for a community our size. Over 250 homes paying $800 per year should have built up a substantial cushion over the years. A man in the back row raised his hand. Can we see a more detailed breakdown of where the money has been going? This summary seems pretty vague. Karen Gallagher stood up, her gold bracelet catching the fluorescent light. I have been treasurer for 12 years, and I can assure you that every penny is accounted for. The summary should be sufficient for homeowner review. The detailed records are available, but they are quite extensive and technical. I would still like to see them, the man persisted. Karen's smile tightened. You can schedule an appointment with me, and I will walk you through the books, but I can assure you, everything is in perfect order. Something about her defensiveness bothered me. I'd spent 15 years as an accountant before switching careers to become a high school math teacher, and I knew that transparent financial organizations welcomed scrutiny. They did not get defensive about showing detailed records. After the meeting, I approached Linda Martinez. I would be happy to volunteer to help with the budget review if you need an extra set of eyes. I have an accounting background. Linda looked relieved. Actually, that would be wonderful. We are supposed to have an annual audit, but we have never really done a thorough one. Karen always handles the finances and the rest of us trust her work. But maybe it would be good to have a formal review before we ask everyone to pay more. I can start whenever you are ready. Let me talk to the board and I will get back to you. 3 days later, Linda called me. The board voted to accept your offer to conduct an audit. Karen was not thrilled about it, but she could not really object without looking suspicious. Can you start this weekend? Absolutely. I will need access to all the bank statements, receipts, invoices, and financial records for at least the past 3 years. Karen is supposed to have everything organized. I will let her know you will be picking up the files on Saturday. Saturday morning, I drove to Karen's house, a large 2-story home on the edge of the development with a 3-car garage and elaborate desert landscaping that must have cost a fortune to install. She answered the door in athletic wear, clearly not pleased to see me. "Gregory, right? Here are the files." She handed me a single cardboard box. "Everything is in there. I have kept meticulous records so you will see that everything adds up perfectly." I took the box, which felt surprisingly light. "This is everything? Bank statements, receipts, invoices, vendor contracts?" "That is the summary documentation. The bank statements are there, along with my annual reports to the board. I will need the actual invoices and receipts, not just summaries." Her jaw tightened. "Those are stored in my garage. They are quite voluminous. Are you sure you need that level of detail?" "For a proper audit, yes, I do." "Fine. Come back next Saturday and I will have them ready." I drove home with the box and spent the afternoon reviewing the contents. It contained 12 years of bank statements and Karen's annual financial summaries to the board. The summaries looked professional, with neat tables showing income from dues, expenses by category, and ending balances. But as I started cross-referencing the summaries against the actual bank statements, discrepancies began to emerge. According to Karen's 2024 annual report, the HOA had spent $12,000 on pool maintenance, but when I went through the bank statements, I could only find $8,000 in checks written to our pool service company, Arizona Aqua Care. Where had the other $4,000 gone? I pulled out my laptop and created a spreadsheet. I started entering every transaction from the bank statements, categorizing each one, and comparing the actual amounts to what Karen had reported. It was tedious work, but it was also revealing. By Sunday evening, I had found over $30,000 in discrepancies just in 2024 alone. The pattern was clear. Karen would report an expense to the board at one amount, but the actual check written would be for a smaller sum. Sometimes the difference was a few $100s, sometimes it was thousands. She had been clever about it, spreading the discrepancies across different categories so no single item looked outrageously inflated. I needed those receipts and invoices. If vendors had been paid the amounts shown on the checks, then the difference between what Karen reported and what was actually paid had gone somewhere else, and I had a pretty good idea where. The following Saturday, I returned to Karen's house. This time, she answered the door looking stressed. "I've been very busy this week. I've not had time to pull all those old receipts." "That's fine. I can help you look through the files. Where are they stored?" She hesitated. "Actually, I'm not comfortable with you going through my personal garage. Let me get them organized, and I will drop them off at your house." "Karen, I need those records for the audit. The board approved this, and I will get them to you. Just give me another week." I knew stalling when I saw it. I've already found some discrepancies in the bank statements that I need to clarify. For example, in July 2024, you reported $12,000 in pool maintenance expenses, but the checks to Arizona Aqua Care only total $8,000. Can you explain the difference? Her face went pale, then flushed red. "I will have to review my records. Sometimes there are supplemental expenses that get categorized together. Then those supplemental expenses should have corresponding receipts or invoices. That is what I need to see." "I will get you the documentation," she said firmly. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have plans this morning." She closed the door in my face. I walked back to my car and sat there for a moment, thinking. This was bigger than just sloppy bookkeeping. This was potential embezzlement. I needed to talk to Linda Martinez. Linda lived in a modest single-story home on the other side of the development. When I called her, she invited me over immediately. I brought my laptop and the box of files. "Linda, I have found serious problems," I said, setting up my laptop on her kitchen table. "Karen has been reporting expenses to the board that do not match the actual amounts paid according to the bank statements, and when I asked her for supporting documentation, she refused to provide it." Linda's face grew serious as I walked her through the spreadsheet. "How much are we talking about?" "In 2024 alone, over $30,000 in discrepancies, but I've only done a detailed analysis of 1 year so far. She's been treasurer for 12 years. "Oh my God, you think she has been stealing from us?" I cannot prove it without seeing the actual invoices and receipts, but the pattern is clear, and her refusal to provide documentation is a major red flag. Linda pulled out her phone. I am calling an emergency board meeting. This cannot wait. The emergency meeting was held on Monday evening. All 5 board members attended, including Karen, who arrived last and sat with her arms crossed defensively. Linda had asked me to present my findings. I set up my laptop and projector, displaying my spreadsheet on the community center wall. I have been conducting the authorized audit of our HOA finances. What I have found so far is deeply concerning. I walked through the discrepancies, showing side-by-side comparisons of what Karen had reported to the board versus what the bank statements showed was actually paid. The other board members looked increasingly alarmed as the presentation continued. These are just the discrepancies I found in 2024, I concluded, but the pattern exists in every year I have reviewed. The total amount of unexplained differences over 12 years could be substantial. However, I cannot complete the audit without access to the actual invoices, receipts, and vendor records, which Karen has refused to provide. All eyes turned to Karen. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice shaking. "You are misinterpreting the records. There are legitimate explanations for everything." Tom Hendricks, the vice president, leaned forward. "Then explain them. Explain why you reported $12,000 in pool maintenance when we only paid $8,000. There were additional expenses, cash payments for emergency repairs, small vendors who do not take checks." "Then there should be receipts," I said. "That is standard bookkeeping. Where are they?" "In my files. I just need time to organize them." Linda shook her head. "Karen, you have had 2 weeks since Gregory first requested them. As treasurer, you should have these records readily available. I'm giving you 48 hours to provide complete documentation, or we will have to take further action." "What kind of action?" Karen demanded. "We will vote to remove you as treasurer and turn this matter over to the authorities if we cannot verify that HOA funds have been properly handled." Karen stood up abruptly. "After 12 years of service, this is how you treat me? I have given countless hours to this community, and now you are going to accuse me of theft based on some amateur audit?" "Then prove us wrong," Frank Chen said quietly. "Show us the receipts." Karen grabbed her purse and stormed out. The next day, I received a call from Linda. "Karen has resigned from the board, effective immediately. She sent an email this morning saying she does not have time for this drama and that we are welcome to find someone else to do the thankless job of treasurer." "Did she provide any documentation?" "Nothing, not a single receipt." "That is basically an admission of guilt. We need to contact the police. I have already spoken to our HOA attorney. He is advising us to complete the audit first so we have a complete picture of what happened. Then, we can file a police report with actual evidence. I will need access to the bank accounts and the authority to contact vendors directly to get copies of invoices." You have it. The board voted this morning to make you the acting treasurer and give you full access to conduct the investigation. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked late into the night, reconstructing 12 years of financial records. I contacted every vendor the HOA had ever used, requesting copies of invoices. Most were cooperative, especially when I explained we were conducting an audit. The picture that emerged was damning. Karen had been systematically inflating expenses in her reports to the board while paying vendors the actual, lower amounts. The difference went into her personal account. She'd been clever about it, keeping each individual discrepancy small enough that it would not immediately raise suspicion. A few hundred here, 1,000 there. But over 12 years, it added up. I also discovered something else. In 2018, there had been a major transfer of funds, $50,000, that Karen had reported as payment for emergency roof repairs on the community center. I called the roofing company that supposedly did the work. "We have never done any work for Sunnyside Heights HOA, the office manager told me. "Are you sure you have the right company?" "You are Arizona Roof Masters, correct?" "Yes, but we have no record of that job. And frankly, $50,000 for a roof that size would be way overpriced. That job should have cost maybe $25,000 tops." "Can you send me a written statement confirming you never performed this work?" "Absolutely." I sat back in my chair, stunned. Karen had not just been skimming. She had fabricated an entire major expense and pocketed $50,000. This was not petty theft. This was a massive fraud. By the end of March, I had the complete picture. Over 12 years, Karen Gallagher had stolen $237,000 from the HOA. The methods varied. Sometimes she inflated real expenses. Sometimes she paid herself reimbursements for expenses that never happened. And sometimes, like with the roof, she invented major projects entirely. I presented my findings to the board in early April. The meeting was somber. $237,000, Linda repeated, looking sick. How did we not notice? She was smart about it, I explained. She kept the annual amounts low enough that our reserves looked reasonable, just slightly lower than they should be. And she was the only one who saw the detailed records. The rest of you only saw her summary reports, which all looked professional and legitimate. What do we do now? Beth Morrison asked. We file a police report and let the criminal justice system handle it, our HOA attorney said. He had attended the meeting to provide legal guidance. I will also recommend that you consult with a civil attorney about recovering the funds. Can we actually get the money back? Tom asked. The attorney looked doubtful. That depends on whether she still has it. If she has spent it, recovery could be difficult, but you have grounds for a civil lawsuit regardless. Linda squared her shoulders. Let us go to the police. Tomorrow. The next morning, Linda and I went to the Phoenix Police Department and filed a report. The detective who took our statement, Detective Sarah Chen, reviewed the documentation I had prepared with intense focus. This is excellent work, she said. You have basically done our investigation for us. We will need to verify some of this independently, but you have given us everything we need to build a case. How long will it take? Linda asked. For an arrest? Probably a few weeks. We will need to get bank records, interview the vendors, and confirm the fraud. But based on what I'm seeing here, we have a strong case for felony theft and fraudulent schemes. Felony? I asked. Oh yes. In Arizona, theft of anything over $25,000 is a Class 2 felony. We are talking about more than $200,000. She is looking at serious prison time if convicted. We left the police station feeling both relieved and anxious. Relieved that we had done the right thing, but anxious about what would happen next. The neighborhood grapevine went into overdrive. Despite our attempts to keep things quiet until the police investigation was complete, word got out that Karen had resigned and that there were financial irregularities. People started asking questions. Some defended Karen, saying there must be some mistake. Others remembered her expensive lifestyle and started doing the math. I tried to stay out of the gossip, but it was impossible to avoid entirely. One afternoon in late April, I was getting my mail when my neighbor, Janet, approached me. Is it true? She asked. Did Karen really steal from us? There is an ongoing investigation. I cannot really comment on it. My cousin lives in her neighborhood, and she said Karen just spent a fortune on her daughter's wedding last month. Like an absolutely insane amount. Open bar, live band, some fancy venue in Scottsdale. People were talking about how expensive it must have been. That caught my attention. Last month? Yeah, early March, right before all this came out. I made a mental note to mention that to Detective Chen. A sudden large expenditure right before the fraud was discovered could be significant. The detective called me a week later. We have confirmed the fraud. Her bank records show deposits that correspond with the timing and amounts of the theft. She has been moving money from the HOA account to her personal account through a series of transfers she tried to disguise as reimbursements and vendor payments. So what happens now? We are executing an arrest warrant tomorrow morning. I wanted to give you a heads up since you are the one who uncovered this. The next day, the neighborhood exploded with activity. Police cars appeared at Karen's house at 6 in the morning. By 7, every neighbor on the street was outside watching as Karen was led out in handcuffs. The image of her, still in her expensive silk pajamas, being placed in the back of a police car would be seared into the neighborhood's collective memory. The local news picked up the story. HOA treasurer arrested for embezzling hundreds of thousands, read the headline on the Phoenix NBC affiliate's website. They interviewed Linda, who handled it well, expressing disappointment but also gratitude that the fraud had been discovered. Karen made bail the same day. Her lawyer immediately began mounting a defense, claiming the charges were based on misunderstanding and poor record-keeping, not intentional fraud. But the evidence was overwhelming. In early May, I was contacted by the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. The prosecutor assigned to the case, Daniel Foster, wanted to meet with me. "Your audit is the backbone of our case," he told me when we met at his office. "I have prosecuted embezzlement cases before, but I have never seen documentation this thorough. You basically handed us a conviction on a silver platter." I just did what needed to be done. I could not let her get away with it. "Well, because of your work, we have a very strong case. I wanted to update you on where things stand. We have charged her with theft, fraudulent schemes and artifices, and money laundering. All felonies. She is facing up to 22 years in prison if convicted on all counts." "Will it go to trial?" "Her attorney is already making noises about a plea deal. The evidence is too strong to fight. I expect we will reach a settlement where she pleads to reduce charges in exchange for cooperation and restitution." "Can she actually pay it back?" His expression darkened. "That's the problem. Our forensic accountants have traced where the money went. A significant portion went to financing her lifestyle, new cars, expensive vacations, home renovations. But the biggest single expenditure was her daughter's wedding in March. She spent over $80,000 on that event." I shook my head. $80,000 of other people's money for a wedding. It gets worse. She knew the audit was coming. Linda Martinez had warned her, so she rushed the wedding, spent the money, and tried to make it look like legitimate expenses. She actually wrote checks to herself labeled as Community Center Repairs and Emergency Landscaping in February, then immediately withdrew the cash and paid wedding vendors. She was trying to drain the accounts before anyone could stop her. That is incredibly brazen. Or desperate. Either way, it shows consciousness of guilt, which helps our case. But it also means there is less money to recover. She has maybe $60,000 in equity in her home, but she also has mortgages and other debts. The HOA will probably recover some funds, but not the full amount. That was disappointing news to bring back to the board, but not surprising. Embezzlers rarely had the stolen money sitting in a bank account waiting to be returned. The legal process moved slowly through the summer. Karen's attorney negotiated with the prosecutor's office while the civil case proceeded in parallel. The HOA had filed a lawsuit seeking full restitution plus damages and legal fees. In June, Karen's daughter Brittany showed up at my door. She was in her late 20s, pretty, and looked like she had been crying. "Mr. Garrison, can I talk to you?" I was not sure this was a good idea, but I invited her to sit on my front porch. "What can I do for you?" "I just wanted to say that I'm sorry. I had no idea where the money for my wedding came from. My mom told me she'd been saving for years. If I had known it was stolen, I never would have accepted it." I believed her. She seemed genuinely distraught. "I am paying it back," she continued. "I got a loan against my car, and my husband and I are selling our wedding gifts. We have raised about $15,000 so far. I know it is not everything, but I want to make this right." "That is commendable," I said. "But you are not legally responsible for your mother's actions." "I know. But morally? Those people paid for my open bar and my live band and my designer dress. It is disgusting. I'm so ashamed." "Have you talked to your mother about this?" Her face hardened. "She does not think she did anything wrong. She keeps saying she deserved that money for all her years of service, like she was entitled to pay herself bonuses without telling anyone. I cannot even talk to her right now." After Brittany left, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger at Karen for what she had done, but also some sympathy for her daughter, who was trying to do the right thing despite being an innocent victim of her mother's crimes. The plea deal came through in August. Karen agreed to plead guilty to 1 count of theft and 1 count of fraudulent schemes. In exchange, the money laundering charge was dropped, and the prosecution recommended a sentence of 5 years in prison with the possibility of early release after 3 years if she made restitution payments. The sentencing hearing was in September. I attended along with Linda and several other board members. The courtroom was formal and intimidating, with high ceilings and dark wood paneling. Karen sat at the defendant's table with her attorney, looking small and defeated. Gone were the expensive clothes and jewelry. She wore a simple gray dress and no makeup. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Hoffman, reviewed the case materials before addressing Karen directly. Ms. Gallagher, you held a position of trust in your community. Your neighbors elected you to manage their shared resources, and you betrayed that trust systematically for over a decade. You stole from families, from retirees on fixed incomes, from young couples trying to buy their first homes. You took their money and spent it on your own luxuries. Karen kept her eyes down. What makes this particularly egregious is that when you knew an audit was coming, you did not come clean. Instead, you stole even more, rushing to take as much as you could before being caught. That shows a complete lack of remorse or moral compass. The judge turned to the sentencing recommendations. I have reviewed the plea agreement. While I understand the prosecutor's reasoning in offering a reduced sentence in exchange for your guilty plea, I find the recommended sentence too lenient given the severity and duration of your crimes. Karen's attorney stood up. Your Honor, my client has no prior criminal record and has shown remorse. She is willing to make full restitution. Willingness to make restitution is not the same as ability, the judge responded. The pre-sentence report indicates that your client has very limited means to repay what she stole. Most of that money is gone, spent on a lifestyle she could not afford. The judge paused, reviewing her notes. I am sentencing you to 8 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections with eligibility for parole after serving 5 years. You will also be required to pay full restitution of $237,000 to the Sunnyside Heights HOA, along with their legal fees and costs. Additionally, you will serve 5 years of probation after your release, during which you will be prohibited from serving in any fiduciary capacity. Do you understand the sentence? Karen nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, Your Honor. Do you have anything you would like to say? Karen stood up shakily. I'm sorry. I know that does not mean much now, but I am sorry. I made terrible choices and I hurt a lot of people. I do not expect forgiveness, but I want everyone to know I am sorry. The judge nodded. Bailiff, please remand the defendant into custody. As Karen was led away, I felt a sense of closure. Justice had been served, even if it could not undo the damage she had caused. Outside the courtroom, Linda and I talked with the prosecutor. What happens now with the restitution? Linda asked. She will be required to make payments, but realistically, you will not see much money while she is in prison. Her assets will be liquidated, which should get you maybe $70,000. Her daughter has also indicated she wants to contribute, which is admirable, but not required. After Karen is released, her wages will be garnished, but it will take many years to recover the full amount. So we will never get it all back, Linda said. Probably not. But you got something else. You got accountability, you got a conviction, and you sent a message that this kind of behavior has serious consequences. That was true, but it was still frustrating. The HOA had to implement a special assessment to rebuild the reserves, meaning every homeowner had to pay an extra $500. It was better than the original proposed increase, but it was still money out of people's pockets because of Karen's theft. In October, I was officially elected as the HOA treasurer by the membership. I accepted on the condition that we implement new financial controls. From now on, the treasurer could not be the only person with access to the accounts. All expenditures over $1,000 required 2 signatures, and we hired an independent accounting firm to conduct quarterly reviews. Karen's house went into foreclosure in November. The bank had started proceedings when she stopped making payments after her arrest. It sold at auction in December for significantly less than it was worth, and the HOA received a portion of the proceeds toward restitution. Brittany made good on her promise. By the end of the year, she had contributed $22,000 toward paying back what her mother stole. It was a remarkable gesture from someone who had no legal obligation to do so. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal, though Karen's name became synonymous with betrayal and greed. Her empty house stood as a reminder of what happens when people abuse positions of trust. In January 2026, I was working in my home office when Linda called. I wanted to thank you again, she said. If you had not volunteered to do that audit, Karen would still be stealing from us. We might never have figured it out. I'm just glad I could help. I could not stand by and watch our community get robbed. You did more than help. You saved us. And you showed everyone that transparency and accountability matter, We are lucky to have you." After we hung up, I thought about everything that had happened. It had been an exhausting year, full of late nights reviewing spreadsheets, stressful meetings, and difficult confrontations. But it had been worth it. Because at the end of the day, communities only work when people look out for each other, when they speak up against wrongdoing, and when they hold leaders accountable. Karen had betrayed that trust. She had looked at her neighbors not as a community to serve, but as a resource to exploit. She had taken money that was meant for shared benefits and spent it on herself. And she had done it for 10 years before finally getting caught. But she had gotten caught. The system had worked, even if it worked slowly. The fraud was discovered, investigated, prosecuted, and punished. The neighborhood knew what happened and why, and we had put protections in place to make sure it could never happen again. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom Hendricks. "Board meeting tomorrow night. We need to discuss the new landscaping proposals. Can you prepare a budget analysis?" I smiled and typed back. "Already done. I will bring copies." That was my role now. The guy who checked the numbers, who asked the hard questions, who made sure our community's money was spent wisely and honestly. It was not glamorous, and it certainly was not exciting. But it was necessary. Because if there is one thing I learned from the whole Karen Gallagher disaster, it is that trust without verification is just an invitation for trouble. Numbers do not lie, but people do. And someone has to be willing to do the boring, tedious work of making sure those numbers add up. I printed out the landscaping budget analysis, double-checking my calculations one more time. Everything was documented, every quote was verified, and every expense was justified. That was how it should be done. As I finished preparing for the meeting, I thought about Karen sitting in a prison cell, probably still telling herself that she deserved that money, that her years of service entitled her to help herself to the HOA's funds. I wondered if she would ever truly understand the harm she caused. But that was not my problem anymore. My problem was making sure the Sunnyside Heights HOA ran properly, that our community's money was protected, that nothing like this ever happened again. I grabbed my laptop and the printed reports and headed out to my car. The sun was setting over the Phoenix desert, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful, the kind of evening that reminded me why I loved living here. As I drove to the community center, I passed the house that used to be Karen's. A new family had moved in, a young couple with a baby. They waved at me from their front yard, and I waved back. They had no idea about the drama that had unfolded in their home, about the fraud and the arrests and the trials. To them, it was just a house in a nice neighborhood, and maybe that was how it should be. The past was the past. Karen was serving her sentence. The HOA had recovered what it could and moved on. We had learned our lesson and implemented better controls. Life continued. The board meeting that night was routine. We reviewed the landscaping proposals, discussed some minor maintenance issues, and approved the quarterly financial report. Everything was transparent, well documented, and properly authorized. It was boring, but boring was good. Boring meant things were working the way they should. After the meeting, Frank Chen pulled me aside. "You know, when you first started asking questions about Karen's records, I thought you were being paranoid. I feel terrible that I did not see what was happening. You trusted her. We all did. That is not a character flaw. But blind trust is. We should have been checking, should have been asking questions. Well, we are asking them now. That is what matters." He nodded. "You are right. Thanks, Gregory, for everything." I drove home thinking about trust and accountability, about how communities function and how they break down. We trust people to do the right thing, and most of the time they do. But there always has to be verification, has to be transparency, because when trust is misplaced, the consequences can be devastating. Karen Gallagher had stolen more than money. She had stolen the community's confidence in its leadership, its faith in the system, its assumption that people in positions of authority act with integrity. Rebuilding that trust had taken months of hard work, open communication, and demonstrated accountability. But we had done it. The HOA was stronger now than it had been before. We had better systems, better controls, and a more engaged membership. People actually read the financial reports now. They asked questions. They paid attention. Sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal fundamental weaknesses in a system. Karen's theft had been that crisis for Sunnyside Heights, and while the immediate aftermath had been painful and divisive, the long-term result was a healthier, more transparent community organization. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment, looking at my house. The mortgage payment included HOA dues, just like it always had. But now I knew exactly where that money was going. I could trace every dollar, verify every expense, and confirm that our community's funds were being used appropriately. That peace of mind was worth all the hours I had spent on the audit, worth the stress and the confrontations and the uncomfortable meetings. Because at the end of the day, I could look my neighbors in the eye and tell them their money was safe. Inside, my wife Sarah was making dinner. How was the meeting? Boring, which is exactly how it should be. She laughed. No more embezzlement scandals? Not tonight. Just routine landscaping decisions and pool maintenance schedules. Living the dream. I kissed her on the cheek. You know what? I really am. It feels good to know our community is running properly, that people are being honest, that the system works. That is because you made it work. You did not have to spend all those hours going through records and fighting with Karen. You could have just paid your dues and ignored the whole thing. No, I could not have. Not once I saw what was happening. She smiled. I know. That is one of the things I love about you. You cannot ignore injustice, even when it would be easier. We ate dinner, and I helped the kids with their homework, and we watched some television before bed. It was a perfectly ordinary evening, unremarkable in every way, and that was perfect. The next morning, I received an email from Detective Chen. Wanted to update you on the Gallagher case. She is settling into prison routine and has started making small restitution payments from her prison job. It will take decades to pay back what she owes, but at least she is trying. Also wanted to thank you again for your work on this case. Your audit was one of the most thorough pieces of civilian investigation I have ever seen. If you ever want a career change, we could use someone with your skills. I smiled at the message, but had no intention of becoming a detective. I was happy teaching high school math and serving as HOA treasurer. Those roles suited me. The months passed, and the Sunnyside Heights HOA continued to function smoothly. We completed the landscaping project under budget. The pool reopened for the summer with a new filtration system. The playground equipment was inspected and certified safe. All the routine, boring tasks that keep a community running. In April 2026, almost exactly 1 year after Karen's arrest, we held the annual meeting. The attendance was much higher than usual. People wanted to see the annual financial report to confirm that their dues were being handled properly. I presented the financials with complete transparency. Every expense was documented and explained. Every vendor was identified. Every receipt was available for inspection. The reserves were being rebuilt ahead of schedule. When I finished the presentation, the room erupted in applause. It was not for me personally. It was for the system, for the accountability, for the reassurance that their community was being managed with integrity. An elderly woman I did not know well raised her hand. I just want to say thank you, not just to Gregory, but to the whole board. What happened with Karen was terrible, but you all handled it properly. You did not cover it up or minimize it. You investigated, you reported it to the police, and you fixed the problems. That takes courage, Linda responded. We did what had to be done, and we are committed to making sure it never happens again. The meeting concluded with unanimous approval of the financial report and a vote of confidence for the board. As people filed out, many stopped to shake my hand or thank me personally. One man, a retired engineer named Robert, pulled me aside. I know this took a lot of your time. I just want you to know it matters. My wife and I are on a fixed income. That $800 a year we pay in HOA dues is a significant expense for us. Knowing that money is being used properly, that someone is watching the accounts, that gives us peace of mind. That's exactly why I did it, I told him. After everyone left, the board stayed to clean up the community center. As we folded chairs and swept the floor, Beth Morrison said, "Do you ever wonder if there are other HOAs out there with their own Karen Gallaghers? People who are stealing and getting away with it?" Probably, I admitted. Embezzlement in HOAs is more common than people think. Small amounts over long periods, handled by one trusted person who never gets audited. That is depressing. It is. But every HOA that implements proper controls, that does regular audits, that requires transparency, that is one less opportunity for fraud. Tom Hendricks nodded. Maybe we should write up what we learned, share it with other HOAs so they can implement similar controls. That is a good idea. I will work on something. Over the next few weeks, I drafted a guide for HOA financial management and fraud prevention. I detailed the warning signs we missed, the controls we should have had in place, and the steps we took to fix the problems. Linda submitted it to the Arizona HOA Association, which published it in their quarterly newsletter. The response was overwhelming. I received emails from HOA board members across Arizona and even from other states, thanking me for the information and asking for advice on conducting their own audits. Several reported finding discrepancies in their own finances and launching investigations. One HOA president in Tucson wrote to tell me they had discovered their treasurer was inflating insurance costs and pocketing the difference. Thanks to the controls I had outlined, they caught it after only 2 years and less than $10,000 in losses. Your guide literally saved our community from a major fraud, she wrote. Thank you for sharing your experience. It felt good to know that something positive had come from the whole terrible situation with Karen. If our experience could help other communities protect themselves, then maybe all the stress and work had a purpose beyond just our own neighborhood. By the summer of 2026, the Karen Gallagher case had become a cautionary tale in Arizona HOA circles. Legal seminars used it as an example of what can go wrong when financial controls are inadequate. Insurance companies referenced it when discussing fiduciary liability coverage. HOA management companies promoted their services by promising to prevent another Sunnyside Heights situation. I found it a bit strange to have our neighborhood scandal become famous, but if it motivated other communities to implement better oversight, then the publicity served a useful purpose. In June, I received a letter from Brittany, Karen's daughter. She had relocated to California with her husband, wanting a fresh start away from the scandal. I wanted to let you know that I have paid back $45,000 so far, she wrote. My husband and I have been living very frugally and putting every extra dollar toward the restitution. I know I am not legally responsible, but I cannot move forward with my life knowing that my wedding was paid for with stolen money. Thank you for your understanding and for treating me with respect when I came to your house. Many people would have blamed me along with my mother. I showed the letter to Sarah. This girl has more integrity than her mother ever did. She is trying to make it right. That counts for something. I wrote back to Brittany, thanking her for her efforts and letting her know that the HOA appreciated her contributions. I also told her that she should not let her mother's crimes define her life, that she was her own person and deserved to move forward without carrying that burden forever. Life settled into a comfortable routine. The HOA functioned well, the neighborhood looked great, and the financial controls I had implemented became standard operating procedure. New board members came on and were trained in the systems we had developed. The annual audits became routine events that consistently showed proper management. In December 2026, almost 2 years after I started the audit that uncovered Karen's fraud, I attended a year-end HOA party at the community center. It was a potluck dinner with neighbors bringing dishes to share, kids running around, and a general atmosphere of community and celebration. As I stood talking with a group of neighbors, someone mentioned that the property values in Sunnyside Heights had increased faster than comparable neighborhoods in the area. Really? Why is that? Someone asked. I read an article about it, another neighbor replied. Apparently what happened with Karen actually made our HOA more attractive to buyers. We have a reputation now for transparency and strong financial controls. People want to buy into communities where they know their money is being managed properly. It was an ironic twist. Karen's theft, which could have destroyed the community's reputation and property values, had instead led to improvements that made the neighborhood more desirable. Sometimes crisis does breed opportunity, even if the path from one to the other is painful. As the party wound down and people started heading home, Linda Martinez pulled me aside one last time. I am stepping down as president next year. I have been doing this for 8 years, and it is time for someone else to take over. I wanted to ask if you would consider running. I hesitated. I do not know. Treasurer is already a lot of work. You would be good at it. People trust you. You proved you are willing to make hard decisions and do what is right, even when it is uncomfortable. Let me think about it. Fair enough. Just know that you have my full support if you decide to run. I drove home that night thinking about leadership and responsibility. I'd never intended to become deeply involved in HOA politics. I just wanted to live in a nice neighborhood, pay my dues, and not worry about things. But once I saw the problems, I could not ignore them. And once I fixed the problems, I could not just walk away and assume someone else would maintain the systems. Maybe that is what leadership really is. Not seeking power or recognition, but being willing to do the necessary work to keep things running properly. Being willing to ask uncomfortable questions, to challenge the status quo, and to hold people accountable. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had made my decision. I would run for HOA president, not because I wanted the title or the position, but because I believed in the community and wanted to protect what we had built. Sarah was not surprised when I told her. I knew you would say yes. You cannot help yourself. Is that a bad thing? Not at all. It is who you are. Just promise me you will not let it consume your life like the audit did. I promise, and this time, we have systems in place. I will not have to rebuild everything from scratch. The election was in January 2027. I ran unopposed and was elected as the new HOA president. In my acceptance speech, I talked about transparency, accountability, and community. I promised to maintain the financial controls we had implemented and to always operate with integrity. What happened with Karen Gallagher was a betrayal of trust, I said, but it also taught us important lessons. We learned that trust must be verified. We learned that transparency protects everyone. And we learned that when communities work together and hold leaders accountable, the system works. The room erupted in applause, and I felt the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. This was not just about managing a budget or maintaining common areas. This was about preserving the trust we had rebuilt, about ensuring that our neighborhood remained a place where people felt safe and valued. As I walked home after the meeting, I thought about Karen, still serving her sentence in prison. I wondered if she had learned anything, if she understood now the full impact of what she had done. Or maybe she still saw herself as the victim, unfairly punished for taking what she felt she deserved. I would probably never know. And in some ways, it did not matter. What mattered was that justice had been served, that the community had survived, and that we had become stronger and more resilient as a result. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a run through the neighborhood. The sun was just coming up, painting the desert sky in shades of pink and gold. The streets were quiet, the houses peaceful, the landscaping well-maintained. It was a beautiful community, worth protecting, worth the effort and the occasional conflict. As I ran past the house that used to be Karen's, I saw the new family's lights come on. A baby cried, and I heard a parent's soothing voice. New life, new beginnings, new stories being written in the same spaces where old dramas had played out. That is how communities work, I realized. They are constantly evolving, constantly changing as old residents leave and new ones arrive. The physical structures remain, but the people and the stories change. What endures are the systems, the values, and the commitment to doing things right. I finished my run and headed home, ready to start another day. I had papers to grade for my teaching job, a board meeting to prepare for, and a community to help lead. It was a full life, sometimes stressful, occasionally frustrating, but ultimately meaningful. Because at the end of the day, what matters most is not how much money you have or how impressive your accomplishments are. What matters is whether you contributed something positive to the world, whether you stood up for what was right, and whether you made your community a better place. Karen Gallagher had failed that test. She had taken advantage of her position, betrayed her neighbor's trust, and stolen from the community she was supposed to serve. She would spend years paying for that choice, both literally through restitution payments and figuratively through the loss of her freedom and reputation. But I had passed the test. I'd seen wrongdoing and refused to ignore it. I'd done the hard work of uncovering the truth, even when it would have been easier to look away. And I had helped build a better, stronger system to protect future residents. That was my legacy in Sunnyside Heights. Not as the guy who caught the embezzler, though that was part of it, but as someone who cared enough to ask questions, to demand accountability, and to do the boring, tedious work of making sure the numbers added up. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.